She only wanted a quiet dinner with her little girls, but humiliation was all she got, until a billionaire in the corner stood up and changed everything. He wasn't just any man, he was her unexpected protector. But what happens when his jealous ex swears revenge and love turns into a battle for survival? Stay till the end, because this story will break your heart, then heal it in the most beautiful way. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so happy to have you here again. Where are you listening to me from today? I pray that peace fills your home, love surrounds your heart, and blessings follow you wherever you go. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It truly means the world and helps us share more powerful stories with you. Now, get comfortable. And let's dive into today's emotional and unforgettable story. Shanae's hands trembled slightly as she stepped through the grand entrance of the luxury restaurant, her twin daughters, Max and Mia, clinging to her fingers, eyes wide with wonder at the glittering chandeliers and the polished marble floors. Her heart pounded fiercely in her chest, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling within her. She had saved for weeks to afford this small luxury, a rare night out for her girls, a fleeting escape from the endless cycle of bills, work, and worry. She adjusted her modest dress nervously, smoothing out invisible wrinkles, wishing she could somehow disappear into the background, yet determined to give her daughters a night they would remember. The hostess smiled politely and led them to a corner table, oblivious to the storm that was about to erupt nearby. Just as Shanae sat down and placed her daughter's small hands gently on her lap, a sharp, mocking voice cut through the serene hum of the restaurant. "Can't afford that dinner, huh?" The words were like an icy blade, slicing through the air, loud enough for nearby diners to glance over in curiosity. Shanae froze, her chest tightening as the insult registered, a flush of humiliation rising to her cheeks. She quickly knelt to meet her daughters at their level, whispering softly to them, "It's okay, my loves, don't pay attention. We're here to enjoy our night." Her voice was gentle, but her heart thudded painfully as she tried to swallow the bitter taste of shame. Max and Mia looked at her with innocent eyes, unaware of the cruelty, giggling nervously as they squeezed her fingers, seeking comfort. Shanae took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She straightened her back, forcing a small smile to mask the sting of humiliation. The blonde woman sitting across the aisle leaned back in her chair, a malicious smirk curling her lips as she sipped her wine, clearly enjoying the display. "Oh, come on, sweetie," she sneered, her tone dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should have stayed home with your little peasants." Shanae felt her stomach twist but said nothing, refusing to retaliate. She had learned long ago that dignity mattered more than pride in moments like these. At a table tucked into the corner, partially obscured by a tall, ornamental plant, a man watched the scene unfold with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the room. Mitchell Stark, a name that carried weight in boardrooms and headlines alike, leaned back slightly in his chair, hands steepled in front of his face, his piercing blue eyes fixed unwaveringly on Shanae. His expression was unreadable, a calm mask that concealed the storm of curiosity, irritation, and an unfamiliar pull he hadn't felt in years. He noted the way Shanae's hands trembled slightly, the grace with which she knelt for her daughters, the gentleness in her voice that diffused a moment that could have easily escalated into tears. The blonde woman, oblivious to the quiet intensity she had just attracted, laughed again, a sound sharp and metallic, as though she thrived on the discomfort of others. Mitchell's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The subtle anger that flared in him was mingled with a strange fascination. There was something about this woman, something genuine hidden beneath the exhaustion and humility she carried, that intrigued him. He had spent decades surrounded by shallow charm, cutthroat ambition, and people who smiled while calculating betrayal. Shanae, however, radiated a warmth that was impossible to fake, even under scrutiny. He found himself leaning forward slightly, watching her interactions with the twins, noting the subtle tenderness in the way she brushed a strand of hair from Mia's forehead and the soft chuckle she offered Max when he fidgeted in his chair. The restaurant's low chatter continued around them, but in this corner, the tension thickened. Shanae's cheeks burned with embarrassment, though she refused to let it dominate her. She focused instead on Max and Mia, giving them her full attention, forcing herself to smile, laugh, and maintain composure. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to linger on the exchange with the blonde woman, but Shanae's serene resistance only amplified the woman's irritation. The blonde leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to assert dominance through glare and tone, but the weight of Mitchell's unseen gaze pressed upon her. Mitchell's curiosity deepened. He noted the subtle strength in Shanae's posture, the way she didn't recoil from humiliation, the way she prioritized her children over her own shame. It was rare to witness such grace under attack, and a strange, almost protective sensation surged within him. The man who had built empires and crushed rivals now felt something entirely alien, a desire to defend a stranger, to shield her from the cruelty that was so casually thrown at her. The blonde woman, sensing something amiss, turned her gaze toward the corner. Her confidence wavered, for a split second as her eyes met Mitchell's. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to send a ripple of uncertainty through her carefully constructed arrogance. She faltered, her smirk twitching, her usual composure disrupted. Shanae didn't notice the subtle exchange. She was too engrossed in calming her daughters, keeping her voice soft and nurturing, whispering, "It's okay, sweethearts. Just eat your dinner. Mommy's right here." Mitchell pushed back his chair and stood, the subtle authority in his movement commanding attention without a word. His long stride carried him to Shanae's table, each step deliberate, measured, and magnetic. Shanae's heart skipped a beat at the sound of his voice as he asked, low and steady, "Are you okay?" The question carried more weight than simple concern. It held the power of attention, protection, and genuine curiosity all at once. Shanae looked up, her eyes meeting his piercing blue gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to still around them. She was unprepared for the intensity, the unexpected warmth, the presence of someone who didn't judge, didn't sneer, didn't mock. The blonde woman's laughter faltered, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness. Her eyes darted between Shanae and Mitchell, and for the first time, she felt the weight of scrutiny she couldn't command or control. Mitchell's expression was unreadable, but heavy with a quiet warning, a tension that seemed to hum through the space between them. The blonde's confidence cracked, and her smile faltered, replaced by a subtle edge of fear. Shanae, still kneeling slightly, felt a strange sense of both relief and awe. Relief that someone had stepped in, awe that this man, stranger as he was, seemed to recognize her worth, to honor her dignity without question. Her pulse raced, her chest tightening as she glanced at the twins, who were now staring up at Mitchell with curiosity and cautious excitement. Max whispered something to Mia, and Mia giggled nervously, breaking the heaviness of the moment for a fleeting instant. Mitchell knelt slightly, just enough to meet the children's eye level without breaking his commanding presence. He offered a small, charming smile, and the twins' initial apprehension melted into tentative laughter. Shanae's breath hitched as she watched the moment unfold. Here was someone whose power could intimidate anyone in the room, yet he chose gentleness, choosing to make her daughters feel safe. A warmth spread across her chest, a flutter she hadn't felt in years. The blonde woman's irritation deepened, her attempt at superiority rendered futile in the presence of a man who clearly commanded respect without malice. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to reclaim dominance, but Mitchell's subtle shift in stance and unwavering gaze silenced her without a word. The tension in the air was palpable, the unspoken power dynamics shifting rapidly. Shanae's mind raced, trying to process the cascade of emotions: humiliation, relief, curiosity, awe, and the faint, dangerous thrill of something she didn't yet understand. She had faced hardships, ridicule, and judgment before, but never had someone intervened in a way that didn't belittle her. Never had someone made her feel seen without expectation. Mitchell straightened, his presence looming yet comforting, and spoke again, this time softer, almost a murmur meant only for Shanae. "You handled that with more grace than most people could muster. Are you truly all right?" Shanae's lips parted, unsure how to respond. The twins giggled again, tugging at her sleeves, reminding her of the fragile joy that had brought them here tonight. The blonde woman's gaze flicked back, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and grudging respect in her eyes. But it was clear she had been bested in subtle, undeniable ways. She turned sharply, muttering something inaudible, and began to retreat toward the exit, leaving Shanae blinking in stunned relief. Shanae's pulse raced as she processed the interaction. She glanced at Mitchell, still standing a step away, his expression softened now, yet holding an unspoken authority that seemed to guard her from more than just ridicule. For a fleeting moment, her world narrowed to the sound of her daughter's laughter, the hum of the restaurant, and the intensity of those blue eyes, looking at her like they could see every hidden corner of her life. Her breath caught as Mitchell finally extended a hand, not to dominate, not to impose, but as a gesture of connection. "If you ever need anything or someone to help, don't hesitate," he murmured, his tone carrying weight beyond words, leaving Shanae stunned, her pride and hesitation battling with a strange flicker of hope. As she looked back toward the now empty spot of the blonde woman, a quiet tension lingered, a whisper that tonight was only the beginning of something far larger, something that could change the course of her life in ways she had never imagined. And for the first time in a long time, Shanae felt both fear and curiosity pulse in tandem, a quiet thrill that perhaps, just perhaps, someone had finally seen her for who she truly was. The chapter ends as Mitchell's eyes lingered on her, unwavering, leaving Shanae's heart pounding with questions she wasn't ready to ask. Yet a promise of something undeniable, something powerful hung in the air between them. Mitchell's piercing blue eyes lingered on Shanae for a moment longer, ensuring she was steady before he gestured toward a more secluded corner of the restaurant, away from prying eyes and the remnants of the blonde woman's arrogance. "Please, come with me," he said quietly, but firmly, a subtle command in his tone that brooked no argument. Shanae hesitated, her hand tightening around Max's and Mia's, the girls looking up at her with trust-filled eyes. Her heart raced, not with fear this time, but with an intoxicating mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Could she really trust a stranger, a man whose presence carried the kind of authority that could command a room with just a glance? I don't need anyone's pity," she whispered, almost to herself, though loud enough for Mitchell to hear. Her pride, sharpened over years of hardship, bristled instinctively at the thought of being helped. Yet when she looked up, Mitchell's expression held no judgment, no superiority, only a calm, measured warmth that made her hesitate, wondering if this could be genuine kindness, not a game of the rich mocking the poor. Mitchell's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a subtle acknowledgement of her words. "I don't pity you," he murmured, low and deliberate, his voice carrying the rare quality of someone who spoke truth rather than manipulation. "I see what others refuse to see." The weight of that statement sent a shiver through her spine, the words sinking in like a quiet promise of something she wasn't used to feeling, being truly seen. Meanwhile, the blonde woman, sensing the shift in control, turned her attention back toward Shanae with renewed fury. Her lips curled into a cruel smile, her eyes burning with indignation as she prepared to unleash another volley of scorn. But before she could speak, Mitchell's gaze cut across the room, a sharp, authoritative sweep that silenced her instantly. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere, a silent assertion of power that demanded respect without a single raised voice. "Please, remove her from the restaurant," Mitchell instructed one of the nearby staff members, his tone calm but absolute. There was no question in it, no hesitation, just a quiet force that brooked no resistance. The staff, sensing the authority in his words and the steely edge in his gaze, moved swiftly to comply. The blonde woman's smirk faltered for a brief, almost imperceptible moment as reality sank in. She had no power here, not against him. Shanae's eyes widened in awe, her pulse quickening as she watched a man she barely knew protect her with such effortless composure. Her mind struggled to reconcile the stranger's calm authority with the warmth she felt in his presence, the undeniable sense of safety that seemed to wrap around her like a shield. Gratitude surged within her, followed by a flicker of something she hadn't anticipated, fascination, an almost magnetic pull toward the man who had entered her life so suddenly, so completely. Mitchell crouched slightly to greet the twins, Max and Mia, who stared at him with wide, cautious eyes. "Hello, little ones," he said, his voice softening just enough to convey warmth without losing authority. "You've got quite the brave mum, haven't you?" He offered them a playful wink, a small gesture that made the girls giggle nervously, their tension easing under his charm. Shanae's breath caught as she watched them respond to him so naturally, the sight igniting a strange, fluttering hope deep within her. He took note of the subtle ways Shanae had handled the previous humiliation. The gentle laughter she forced herself to share with her daughters, the way she had knelt to comfort them, the quiet dignity with which she absorbed the insult without losing her composure. For someone accustomed to the cold calculation of business deals, the selfless strength of a mother protecting her children struck him with unexpected intensity. It was a pang in his usually guarded heart, a rare crack in the armor of a man who had spent years shielding himself from emotional vulnerability. "You don't deserve this," Mitchell murmured, almost to himself, his voice barely above the level of the ambient restaurant chatter. It was not a condemnation of the blonde woman, not merely an observation. It was a recognition of Shanae's worth, of the quiet courage she displayed when others sought to diminish her. Shanae's eyes met his, confusion and curiosity warring within her, as if she were trying to read the intentions of a man who seemed to operate on a level far beyond her comprehension. She wanted to speak, to ask why a man of such power would care about someone like her, a woman struggling just to keep her daughters safe and happy. Yet the words caught in her throat, swallowed by the mixture of awe, fear, and a curiosity she wasn't ready to admit. Instead, she simply watched, heart hammering as Mitchell's presence became a protective barrier around them. The blonde woman, realizing she had lost her advantage, fumed silently. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by tight-lipped anger, and she glared daggers at both Shanae and the man who had rendered her powerless. Her hands clenched subtly in frustration, a storm of humiliation brewing behind her poised facade. But Mitchell's unwavering gaze kept her at bay, a quiet warning that her influence extended no further in this space. Mitchell straightened, brushing a hand lightly over his suit jacket as he turned his attention fully back to Shanae. The corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest of reassuring smiles, and he extended a card toward her with careful precision. Shanae blinked, startled, her fingers hovering over it as though the small piece of paper held the weight of the universe. "If you ever need help, call me," he murmured, his voice soft yet layered with unspoken promises. The words lingered between them, a lifeline and a mystery rolled into one. Shanae's mind raced, torn between pride and curiosity, between the instinct to refuse and the magnetic pull of someone who seemed genuinely invested in her well-being. Outside the immediate warmth of the corner, the restaurant's hum continued, but the atmosphere around Shanae and Mitchell felt suspended in time. Every sound, the clink of silverware, the murmur of other diners, even the retreating steps of the blonde woman, was muted against the intensity of the connection forming before her. The twins giggled softly, unaware of the weight of the moment, but Shanae felt it acutely, the edges of fear and hope intertwining in her chest. Mitchell's eyes lingered on hers, steady, unflinching, yet soft in a way that made her pulse race. There was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet assertion that she was seen, that her worth mattered, that she was not alone. Shanae's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the card, tracing the embossed letters with a fingertip, a tangible symbol of a world she had never dared to imagine might exist for her. The blonde woman finally turned on her heel, storming off in fury, but the tension didn't dissipate completely. Shanae's thoughts swirled with questions. Who was this man? Why had he intervened? And most urgently, what would happen next? The card in her hand felt heavy with possibility, a door slightly ajar into a life she had never considered for herself or her daughters. Mitchell inclined his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement that the immediate danger had passed, but the air between them remained charged, pregnant with unspoken questions, quiet promises, and the flicker of something neither could yet define. Shanae's gaze dropped to the twins, who clung to her skirts, and then back to him, heart hammering. She wanted to retreat, to preserve her independence, yet some unnameable force kept her rooted in place. As the chapter closes, Shanae tucked the card carefully into her bag, fingers brushing over it like a secret she wasn't yet ready to share. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the night sky, oblivious to the invisible tether that now connected her and the enigmatic stranger. Mitchell's eyes followed her discreetly as she adjusted the twins in their seats, a quiet intensity burning in his gaze, leaving Shanae with a mix of awe, apprehension, and the faint, unspoken knowledge that her life had just changed forever. And in the shadowed corner of the restaurant, the blonde woman's fury simmered, a silent vow of revenge lingering in the air, an ominous reminder that the peace Shanae had just experienced might be fleeting, and that the protector she had found could soon face challenges he had never anticipated. Shanae stepped through the door of her modest apartment, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind still spinning from the events at the restaurant. Max and Mia ran ahead, their little feet tapping across the wooden floor, laughter echoing softly as they chased each other around the living room. Despite her fatigue, a warmth swelled in her chest, knowing that tonight, even briefly, she could offer her daughters a slice of normalcy, a night that was theirs, untainted by the judgments of strangers. She gently guided them to the kitchen, carefully washing her hands and tying back the few stray strands of hair that had escaped her bun. Every movement was deliberate, slow, as if performing a ritual to regain control of her own world, her own small sanctuary. She began preparing a simple meal, the clatter of pots and pans filling the apartment with a comforting rhythm. Max perched on a stool, leaning forward curiously, while Mia hummed softly beside her. The aroma of simmering vegetables and freshly baked bread seemed to ease the tension coiling in Shanae's chest, yet the memory of the blonde woman's cruel words lingered stubbornly, a shadow she couldn't quite shake. She reminded herself that she had survived worse, that her daughter's smiles were stronger than any insult, yet the sting of humiliation had been real, and the appearance of that man, Mitchell, lingered in her mind like a spark in dry grass, igniting thoughts she didn't yet understand. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her. She wiped her hands quickly and reached for it, expecting perhaps a routine message or a notification. Instead, her heart skipped a beat at the screen. A message from Mitchell. "Dinner tomorrow, for you and the girls." My treat. Shanae blinked, fingers hovering over the phone as pride and curiosity warred within her. Why would a billionaire care? Why would a man who commanded empires and influence reach out to someone like her, someone who had never walked in his world? She placed the phone down, pacing slowly, whispering to herself, "Is this real?" Or is it another game? Her thoughts swirled, memories of Mitchell's calm, protective presence clashing with the laughter and cruelty of the blonde woman. The juxtaposition was dizzying, leaving her unsettled yet undeniably intrigued. She watched Max and Mia carefully, their little faces filled with trust and hope, and felt a pang of guilt for even considering a night outside her comfort zone. But then their small voices broke through, clear and pleading. "Mommy, can we go? Please?" Their innocence, the pure trust in their eyes, softened her resolve. She finally nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat, though a tiny voice inside whispered caution, warning her of unknown dangers. That night sleep came fitfully. Shanae dreamt of Mitchell, but not as the powerful, unapproachable CEO she had imagined. In her dreams, he was merely a man who saw her, the real her, the woman who had fought silently, who had borne hardship with grace, who had loved her daughters fiercely and without complaint. She awoke several times, heart pounding, each instance replaying the intensity of his gaze, the unexpected tenderness, and the unspoken promise that lingered in the way he had stood between her and humiliation. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and hesitant, as if the world itself was testing her resolve. She dressed carefully, choosing simple but neat attire, brushing her daughter's hair into tidy styles and holding their hands as they approached the towering office building of Mitchell Stark. The sheer scale of the glass and steel structure made her pause, awe mingling with nervousness. Each step toward the entrance felt surreal, as though she had crossed a threshold into a world she had never imagined could welcome someone like her. Inside, the reception area glittered with opulence, marble floors reflecting the sunlight, and artful displays that whispered of wealth beyond comprehension. Shanae's grip tightened instinctively on Max and Mia's hands as they approached the elevators, her pulse a steady drumbeat of anticipation and apprehension. Then Mitchell appeared, as if conjured by her thoughts, the intensity of his presence immediately grounding her amidst the overwhelming grandeur. He greeted them with warmth that disarmed her entirely, his usual intimidating aura softened into something oddly comforting. "Welcome," he said, his smile subtle but genuine, eyes crinkling slightly at the corners as he offered a reassuring nod to the twins. Max and Mia giggled nervously, drawn to his easy charm, and Shanae felt a flicker of relief. For the first time, the intimidating exterior of a billionaire seemed human, approachable, and even protective. The dining room he led them to was elegant yet intimate, a space designed to foster conversation rather than impress with excess. Shanae took a deep breath, noting the careful attention to detail in every element, the soft lighting, the gentle music, the unobtrusive staff attending quietly without intrusion. She sat with the girls, hands intertwined with theirs, feeling both a sense of anticipation and the persistent whisper of caution in her mind. Mitchell seated himself across from them, his presence commanding yet gentle. "So," he began, voice low and deliberate, "tell me about your day. How have you and these two little adventurers been?" His tone was curious, interested, yet wholly free of condescension. Shanae blinked at him, struck by how rare it was for someone to ask about her life with genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. The twins immediately animated, sharing stories of school, friends, and small triumphs. Mitchell listened intently, laughter escaping him naturally at their jokes, offering playful comments that drew shrieks of delight from Max and Mia. Shanae felt the barriers around her heart slowly softening, the skepticism she had built over years of hardship quietly eroding in the warmth of his attention. Here was a man who asked, who listened, who laughed, not at her or her struggles, but alongside her and her children. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed suspended in a bubble of genuine connection. Shanae allowed herself to relax, enjoying the rare intimacy of someone acknowledging her life, her struggles, and her children without judgment. She noticed the subtle glances Mitchell threw her way, quick assessments mixed with curiosity, and something she couldn't yet name. It was a dance of observation and respect, unspoken yet palpable, filling the space with tension she hadn't anticipated. Just as she was beginning to feel a fragile sense of security, a shadow fell across the table, disrupting the moment. Shanae's chest tightened instantly, recognition flaring in her mind. The blonde woman had returned, eyes glinting with silent malice, her posture rigid with fury and intent. Shanae froze, Max and Mia tugging slightly at her sleeves, sensing her unease. The warmth of the evening evaporated, replaced by an electric current of anxiety that made her stomach twist. Mitchell's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing, and a muscle in his jaw flexed. He had seen the shadow cast before, but now it loomed closer, more threatening than before. The tension in the room shifted, the gentle bubble of conversation crackling with unseen danger. Shanae felt the weight of the moment pressing down, her heart beating faster, the laughter of her daughters replaced by the tight silence of apprehension. She looked to Mitchell, searching for reassurance. His gaze held her firmly, unwavering, yet the subtle flash of warning in his eyes reminded her that they were not entirely safe. The blonde woman's intentions were unknown, her presence a silent threat, and Shanae realized that the fragile peace she had felt moments ago could shatter with the next movement, the next word. The chapter closes with Shanae's pulse racing, the twins clinging to her, and Mitchell's protective presence, a tether in a world suddenly fraught with uncertainty. The blonde woman's return hung like a storm cloud, promising confrontation, danger, and challenges that Shanae could not yet foresee, leaving every heartbeat on edge, every moment pregnant with suspense. The atmosphere in the elegant restaurant changed instantly, the warmth that had filled the air moments ago turning brittle as the blonde woman's sharp heels clicked against the polished marble floor. Shanae's spine stiffened at the familiar sound. She didn't even need to lift her head to know who it was. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her daughter's hands, as if anchoring herself against the wave of humiliation that memory threatened to unleash. Max and Mia, sensing something wrong, went silent, their bright laughter fading into the kind of uneasy stillness that only a child's intuition could summon. Mitchell's expression darkened almost imperceptibly, the easy warmth he'd shown moments before, cooling into an intimidating stillness. The blonde woman's confident smirk faltered briefly under the weight of his gaze, but she pressed forward anyway, tossing her golden curls over her shoulder as if reclaiming her territory. "Mitchell," she purred, her voice honeyed but brittle with jealousy, "I didn't realize you entertained guests like this." Her tone dripped venom, the last word landing like a dagger meant to wound. Shanae felt her cheeks burn, her heart clenching in mortification, but before she could respond, Mitchell's hand moved across the table, slow, deliberate, and came to rest over hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shock through her body, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. His voice, when it came, was calm but edged with steel. "This ends now," he said, each word laced with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. His blue eyes, so often distant and unreadable, now burned with something fiercely protective. Shanae blinked, torn between gratitude and disbelief. The blonde woman paused, her confidence faltering at the sudden coldness in Mitchell's tone. "You think you can replace me?" she hissed, leaning closer, her words intended to cut deep. Shanae's heart sank, not because of jealousy, but because the accusation carried an unfamiliar weight, a reminder of the world she had accidentally stumbled into, one she wasn't prepared for. Mitchell's jaw tightened, and he stood slowly, towering between Shanae and the blonde woman like an unspoken barrier. "You were never meant to be here," he said quietly, the calm in his voice more terrifying than anger. The blonde woman's painted smile faltered. She opened her mouth to retort, but was silenced by the icy intensity of his stare. The restaurant, moments ago alive with chatter, now felt suspended in uneasy silence as eyes turned toward the unfolding confrontation. Shanae wanted to disappear, to take her girls and flee from this storm that wasn't hers to weather, yet she couldn't look away. The man who had seemed untouchable, this billionaire with a fortress around his emotions, was now openly defending her, his composure cracking just enough to reveal something raw, something human. Her stomach twisted in anxiety, but somewhere beneath the fear, a strange warmth flickered to life. The blonde woman recovered quickly, stepping closer with forced confidence. "Mitchell," she said softly, trying to recapture the seductive tone that once commanded his attention. "You can't possibly be serious about this woman. She's—" But she stopped as Mitchell raised a hand sharply, his expression hardening. "Enough," he cut in, his voice slicing through the air. "You don't get to insult her. Not here. Not ever again." The words hung between them, final and immovable. Shanae's breath caught in her throat, disbelief washing over her as the realization sank in. He wasn't pretending, he wasn't playing a game of chivalry for show. He meant every word. Her gaze drifted to his hand still covering hers, the firm yet gentle grip that said more than words ever could. It wasn't pity, it was protection, genuine and uncalculated. For a long moment, the blonde woman just stared, anger and humiliation warring in her eyes. Then, with a mocking smile that didn't reach her eyes, she whispered coldly, "You'll regret this," before turning sharply on her heel. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, the only trace of her presence left behind, but the echo of her threat hung heavy between them. Shanae exhaled shakily, her body trembling with the aftermath of tension. She wanted to thank Mitchell, to say something, anything, but the words tangled on her tongue. Her world had always been built on independence and silent endurance. Accepting help was not something she knew how to do easily. Mitchell glanced at her, eyes softening again, the sharpness replaced by a quiet understanding. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured, leaning slightly closer. "She has no power here." The gentleness in his tone caught her off guard, unraveling the defenses she had so carefully built. Her heart fluttered in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her, mingled with confusion. How could someone so far removed from her life, someone who belonged to another world entirely, make her feel so seen, so safe, with just a few words? She opened her mouth, but all she managed was a faint, "Why are you doing this?" Mitchell's gaze held hers, unreadable yet magnetic. "Because someone should have," he said quietly, as if the words were an admission more to himself than to her. The sincerity in his voice left her momentarily speechless. For the first time, Shanae saw past the billionaire facade, the polished exterior, the power, the wealth, and glimpsed the loneliness beneath it. It was as though two different worlds had briefly met, touching edges before reality would inevitably pull them apart again. The girls tugged at her sleeves gently, their wide eyes watching Mitchell with cautious curiosity. He knelt slightly to their level, his expression softening further. "You two were very brave tonight," he said, smiling faintly. Max giggled shyly, while Mia hid behind her mother's leg. Shanae watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling unexpectedly at how naturally he interacted with them. There was no arrogance, no patronizing charm, just warmth. When the dinner finally drew to a close, the tension had eased slightly, though Shanae's mind remained a whirlwind. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Mitchell walked beside her, the city lights painting his features in gold and shadow. "Let me drive you home," he offered quietly, his tone leaving little room for argument but layered with concern. Shanae hesitated, her instinct to refuse warring with the gratitude blooming in her chest. "You've done enough," she said softly, though her voice trembled. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Not yet," he replied. "Not until I know you're safe." The conviction in his words left her momentarily breathless. She finally nodded, allowing him to lead them to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The girl's excitement over the luxurious vehicle momentarily broke her tension, their laughter ringing through the air like tiny bells. Mitchell opened the door for them, a small smile playing at his lips as he helped Shanae inside. His hand brushed against hers, accidental perhaps, but enough to send a current of electricity racing up her arm. The ride was quiet, filled with an unspoken tension neither dared address. The city blurred past the windows, lights shimmering like fragments of dreams. Shanae stared out, watching the reflections, wondering if she was stepping into opportunity or chaos, unsure whether this unexpected bond would protect her or destroy the fragile balance she had built. When the car finally stopped outside her apartment, she turned to thank him, but Mitchell's gaze caught hers in the dim light, filled with something unreadable, something dangerous. "Good night, Shanae," he said softly, his voice lower than before, laced with something that made her pulse race. She nodded, words caught in her throat, then turned away quickly, clutching her daughters close as she stepped out. As the car pulled away, Shanae lingered for a moment beneath the flickering streetlight, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. The city stretched before her, vast and unknowable, and for the first time in years she felt the uncertain pull of destiny, one that both thrilled and terrified her. Somewhere in that glittering skyline, Mitchell Stark was thinking of her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just become irreversibly entangled. The night air brushed against her skin, cool and whispering secrets she couldn't yet understand. Inside her apartment, as she tucked her daughters into bed, the echo of his words lingered, "You don't have to be afraid." But fear wasn't what kept her awake that night. It was something else entirely, something deeper, something dangerously close to longing. And as she lay staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of distant traffic outside her window, one thought refused to leave her mind. Mitchell Stark wasn't just a passing stranger in her story anymore. He was the beginning of something she couldn't stop, even if she tried. The night had barely settled when Shanae closed the apartment door behind her, still feeling the lingering echo of Mitchell's protective gaze from their last encounter. The memory of his hand covering hers at the restaurant table replayed again and again in her mind, like a scene she couldn't escape. His touch was firm yet reassuring, gentle yet powerful enough to silence the blonde woman's venom. Shanae had faced humiliation before, but this time someone had stood beside her, not out of pity, but out of genuine care, and that thought made her heart beat differently. The city outside glimmered through her window, but the reflection that stared back was one of confusion and quiet hope. She tried to shake the thought away, but when Max and Mia snuggled beside her on the couch and giggled, "Mommy, Mr. Mitchell was so nice. He bought us dessert." She couldn't help but smile softly, even as she whispered, "Yes, he was." Somewhere deep inside, a wall she had built over years of pain began to tremble. Days slowly turned into a rhythm she hadn't expected. Each morning after her early shift, Shanae would return home to find something unexpected waiting by her door. Sometimes a small bouquet of lilies, sometimes a note written in neat handwriting, sometimes even a basket of groceries with no sender name, but she knew who it was from. Mitchell's gestures were never grand in the flashy sense of a billionaire's wealth, yet they carried an intimacy that unsettled and comforted her at the same time. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she found a small envelope tucked under the door. Inside, written in black ink, were the words, "You deserve ease, Shanae. Not struggle, not exhaustion, ease." Her hands trembled slightly as she read it aloud under her breath, her heart tugging at the thought that someone had noticed her silent battles. When Mitchell began showing up occasionally to take her and the girls out for ice cream or walks in the park, the entire neighborhood seemed to buzz with whispers. Mothers stared curiously, children pointed at his sleek car, and older neighbors gave knowing smiles. Shanae tried to brush it off, telling herself it was nothing more than kindness, but every time his eyes found hers, steady, searching, impossibly gentle, she knew it wasn't just that. There was something in his gaze that told her he saw her, really saw her, beyond the waitress uniform, beyond the tired mother, beyond the woman who had been judged by so many. Max and Mia, in their innocent joy, grew instantly attached. Mitchell was like a giant playmate who carried them on his shoulders, who listened to their stories about school and giggled at their mismatched jokes. Sometimes Shanae would watch him kneel down to tie Max's shoelaces or hand Mia her favorite strawberry candy, and she would feel her breath catch unexpectedly. He fit so seamlessly into their small world, and that realization terrified her as much as it warmed her heart. She reminded herself constantly, he was a billionaire, she was a single mother, barely surviving. They belonged to two different worlds, and fairy tales weren't meant for women like her. Yet the bond grew. It wasn't forced. It was slow, steady, like the sunrise that gently warms the night away. One evening, as the girls dozed off after watching cartoons, Mitchell and Shanae sat on the small couch with cups of tea between them. The dim light flickered softly across their faces. "You work too hard," he said quietly, his tone lacking the arrogance most men of power carried. She gave a half-smile. "That's what mothers do," she replied. He studied her for a moment before speaking again. "I wasn't raised to notice people who struggle. But you've changed that, Shanae. You make me see differently." His words lingered in the air like an unfinished melody. Shanae didn't know what to say. She stared into her cup, unsure if her tears were from gratitude or fear. As the days passed, conversations deepened. Mitchell opened up about his past, about growing up in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was a constant companion. He told her about business partners who turned on him and a family that cared more for his fortune than his heart. Shanae listened quietly, occasionally offering a nod, sometimes a soft smile that seemed to ease his pain. In turn, she spoke of her struggles as a mother raising twins alone, of losing her job once because she missed a shift to care for a sick child, of the nights she went hungry so her daughters wouldn't. There was no judgment in Mitchell's eyes, only admiration. Admiration for her strength, for the way she carried the weight of her world with grace. But Shanae's heart was cautious. Love, she knew, was a dangerous luxury, and she couldn't afford another heartbreak, not when her girls depended on her. Still, she couldn't ignore the way her pulse quickened when his name flashed on her phone, or the way her lips curved when she read his messages that always ended with, "Take care, Shanae." It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about being seen, being valued, something she hadn't felt in years. One chilly evening, after a long day at the diner, she returned home to find an elegant envelope slipped under her door. It was Mitchell's handwriting again. Inside, along with his business card, was a note written from the heart. "I want to help you live the life you deserve, Shanae." She sat on the couch for a long while, the note resting on her lap, her mind spinning. Was this an offer of love or charity? Was he crossing a line, or was he extending a lifeline she'd long needed? Her eyes stung with tears as she whispered to herself, "Why me, Mitchell? Why now?" She didn't realize that outside, in the shadowed corner across the street, a familiar figure stood watching. The blonde woman, her eyes sharp and lips twisted into a cruel smirk, leaned against her car. The cold glow of the streetlight highlighted the bitterness carved into her expression. She had seen the deliveries, the dinners, the laughter. and she hated every second of it. "So this is who replaced me," she murmured under her breath, her voice dripping venom. "Let's see how long she lasts." Inside, Shanae tucked the note into her drawer, unaware of the danger brewing beyond her window. She spent the night restless, torn between excitement and unease. When morning came, she tried to go about her routine as usual, packing lunches, tying Mia's braids, kissing Max on the forehead, but the sense of being watched wouldn't leave her. Every step outside her apartment felt heavier, every shadow sharper. Meanwhile, Mitchell sat in his office, staring out the glass walls at the city below, unable to focus on his files. His instincts told him something was off. The blonde woman, his past, was not someone who would simply walk away. His jaw tightened at the thought. He picked up his phone several times, tempted to warn Shanae, but hesitated. She was proud, strong, and fiercely independent. He didn't want to scare her or make her feel like he was intruding. Instead, he sent a short message. "Are you okay?" Her reply came a few minutes later. "Just tired. Long day." It wasn't enough to ease his concern. That night, the sky grew darker than usual. The streets outside Shanae's apartment were unusually quiet. She had just tucked the girls into bed when a faint noise made her freeze. A soft knock echoed through the stillness. 3 knocks, deliberate, slow. Her breath hitched. The clock read past 11. No one visited her at that hour. She grabbed her robe, her heart pounding as she crept toward the door. The air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Then another knock. Max stirred in the next room, mumbling in his sleep. Shanae swallowed her fear and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's just a neighbor." But her gut told her otherwise. Slowly, she reached for the handle. The hallway light flickered through the peephole. Her eyes widened when she saw a silhouette standing there, feminine, tall, familiar. The blonde woman. Her pulse quickened, a tremor racing down her spine. She stepped back instinctively, clutching her chest. What did she want? Why was she here? She glanced toward her phone on the table, contemplating calling Mitchell. But before she could decide, the knocking came again, harder, more impatient. Her mind raced. The girls were asleep. She couldn't risk waking them or letting fear show. She had to be strong. Outside, the blonde woman smiled coldly, her voice barely audible through the door. "Miss me?" Inside, Shanae froze, her eyes darting toward the twins' room. The tension was suffocating, her thoughts spiraling between fear and fury. As she backed away slowly, the sound of the city faded into silence, leaving only the rhythmic beating of her heart echoing through the apartment. And then, the final knock, louder, bolder, rang through the room like a threat wrapped in silk. Shanae took a deep breath, every instinct screaming that her quiet world was about to change forever. Who was really behind the door? An enemy seeking revenge, or a warning of something darker that even Mitchell couldn't protect her from? The answer waited on the other side, but Shanae wasn't sure she was ready to face it yet. The knocking grew louder, echoing through Shanae's tiny apartment, like the heartbeat of something inevitable. She stood frozen, her trembling hand hovering above the doorknob, fear twisting in her stomach. Her mind screamed not to open it, yet some strange pull urged her to look, to face whatever waited on the other side. The last knock was sharp and final, then silence. Her breath came fast and shallow as rain began to patter heavily against the window, the city outside swallowed by a storm. Gathering her courage, Shanae slowly turned the lock, her body tense and ready for the worst. The door creaked open, and her gasp caught in her throat. It wasn't the blonde woman. It was Mitchell. He stood there, drenched from head to toe, his suit clinging to his frame, dark hair plastered across his forehead. The light from the hallway spilled over him, revealing the exhaustion and raw urgency in his eyes. "Mitchell!" Shanae whispered, half in disbelief, half in relief. He exhaled deeply, his breath visible in the cold air, and his voice was low, roughened by the rain. "I couldn't risk you being alone tonight." For a moment, neither moved. Shanae's heart pounded wildly as she took in his presence, his soaked clothes, his trembling hands, his expression that carried no trace of the composed CEO she knew. This was a man undone by worry. She stepped aside instinctively, allowing him in, though her voice was barely steady. You shouldn't be here." "It's so late." Mitchell ran a hand through his wet hair, his chest rising and falling heavily. "I know," he admitted, "but I saw her." That stopped Shanae in her tracks. "Her?" she repeated quietly. He nodded. "The blonde woman. She was near your building. My driver spotted her waiting by the corner, and I couldn't just sit back." Shanae felt a chill run through her, not from the storm, but from the confirmation of her unspoken fear. The unease that had stalked her for days suddenly took form and name. Before she could respond, two small voices broke the tension. "Mommy?" Max peeked out from the bedroom door, rubbing his eyes, Mia clinging to his arm. Mitchell immediately softened, kneeling down despite the puddle forming beneath him. "Hey, angels," he said gently, his voice transforming into warmth. "I didn't mean to scare you." The twins stared at him for a moment, then giggled shyly when he smiled. Shanae felt her breath catch again, how easily he could switch from steel to tenderness, how effortlessly he fit into their small, fragile world. She knelt beside him, brushing a lock of wet hair from his face. "You're soaked," she murmured. "You'll get sick." He gave a faint, weary smile. "I'll dry off. I just needed to see you safe." As she handed him a towel, Shanae's mind spun with confusion and emotion. This man, this billionaire who could have been anywhere, had chosen to stand outside her door in the rain, uninvited, unannounced, simply because he was worried. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly, unable to meet his eyes. Mitchell's expression softened as he sat on the couch, drying his hands. "Because you matter," he said simply. "You and those girls." "I can't explain it, Shanae. I just needed to be sure you were all right." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten painfully. It was so rare for anyone to show her this kind of care, and it terrified her how much it meant. As the storm raged outside, thunder rumbling like an untamed heart, Shanae brewed tea, trying to calm the chaos inside her. She handed him a mug, and when their fingers brushed, the touch sent a spark up her arm. "You didn't have to come," she whispered again. "You shouldn't worry about me." Mitchell's eyes held hers across the dim light of the living room. "That's the thing," he murmured. "I can't stop." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The storm outside, the ticking clock, even her doubts. He leaned back, exhausted, and finally told her everything. How the blonde woman had been harassing his staff, digging into Shanae's life, even trying to bribe people from her workplace to speak against her. "She's desperate," Mitchell explained, his tone tightening. "She wants attention. And when she realized she couldn't control me anymore, she decided to hurt whoever I cared about." Shanae's blood ran cold at his words. "She knows where I live?" she asked, fear flickering in her eyes. "Possibly," he admitted, "but I've already made some calls. There'll be security watching the area from tonight. I won't let her near you." Shanae sank into a chair, her hands trembling, gratitude warred with disbelief in her chest. "Why me?" she asked softly, the same question that had haunted her since the day he entered her life. "You could have anyone. You could help anyone. Why me?" Mitchell looked at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them before he finally said, "Because I see you, Shanae. Truly see you. And once you see what's real, you can't unsee it." His voice carried no pretension, no agenda, just truth. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. She looked away, biting her lip. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "It makes it harder to keep pretending." The rain continued its relentless drumming on the windows as the clock struck midnight. The twins had fallen asleep again, curled up together on the couch, and Shanae covered them with a blanket. Mitchell watched her quietly, his eyes softening as he took in the sight of her bending over her children, a mother who had fought every battle alone and yet stood tall through it all. "You amaze me," he said under his breath, and though Shanae heard it, she pretended she hadn't. She didn't know how to handle words like that anymore. When she finally sat beside him, their silence felt different, not heavy, but intimate, filled with everything they couldn't yet say. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" he asked suddenly. She turned her head toward him, meeting his gaze. "Every day," she admitted quietly, "but I can't stop. They depend on me." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have to fight alone anymore." His hand brushed hers, and for a second she didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes, it all made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe, seen, wanted. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the apartment for a brief moment. Shadows danced across the walls, then disappeared into the darkness again. Shanae sighed softly. "It's strange," she said. "I should be terrified. But I'm not. Not when you're here." Mitchell smiled faintly, his gaze unwavering. "Then maybe that's how it's supposed to be." Time slipped by quietly. Their conversation turned softer, drifting from fears to dreams, from pain to laughter. He told her about the night sky above his estate, how he'd sit for hours watching stars that never looked back. She told him about how she used to sing to her girls when they were babies, to drown out the hunger and loneliness. He listened, not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped of all titles, drawn to a woman whose strength humbled him. And she, despite her doubts, began to realize that the walls around her heart were slowly crumbling. But just as the air between them grew warm and fragile with unspoken emotion, a sudden sound shattered the calm, a loud crash from outside the window. The teacup slipped from Shanae's hand, shattering on the floor. Mitchell was on his feet in an instant, his sharp instincts kicking in. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone clipped, protective. Shanae's pulse raced as he moved toward the window. The storm howled, the wind slamming against the glass. "Mitchell, be careful," she whispered, clutching her robe tightly. He peered out into the darkness, but the rain blurred everything beyond recognition. Then, movement. A shadow darting past the building's edge. Mitchell's jaw clenched. He reached for his phone, already calling his security. "There's someone out there," he muttered. Shanae stood beside him now, her face pale. "She's watching us, isn't she?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was enough. He gently took her by the shoulders, his voice steady but firm. "No matter what happens, you and the girls stay away from the windows. Promise me." She nodded shakily, her eyes glistening. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, the gesture so tender it almost hurt. "I won't let anything happen to you," he whispered. But even as he said it, another sound echoed through the apartment, a faint scraping, like footsteps outside the back door. Shanae gasped, clutching his arm. The lights flickered once, then again. The storm intensified, lightning splitting the sky open as thunder roared in reply. They exchanged a look, fear, trust, connection, all tangled into one moment that neither would forget. The twins stirred in their sleep, unaware of the danger creeping closer. And then, just before the next flash of lightning, the scraping stopped. Silence. Shanae's heart pounded in her chest as she whispered, "Mitchell, what if it's not her?" He turned his gaze toward the window again, every muscle tense. "Then we'll find out," he said. "Together." And then another crash, louder this time. Glass trembled. The wind howled through a small crack in the frame. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside their hearts, wild, unstoppable, charged with fear and unspoken emotion. Shanae's fingers found Mitchell's without thinking, gripping tightly as if her entire world depended on it. The crash outside wasn't just thunder. It was something else, something deliberate. Someone, or something, was out there, watching, waiting. And as Mitchell pulled Shanae closer, his voice low and steady, one thing became certain. The night was far from over, and neither of them would leave it unchanged. The sound of shattering glass tore through the room like a scream. Shanae's breath caught as the world around her froze, the teacup fragments on the floor, the flickering lights, the storm howling through a crack in the window, all blurred into a haze of panic. Mitchell moved faster than thought, his arm instinctively wrapping around Shanae, pulling her close while his other hand shielded the twins. The sharpness in his gaze replaced every ounce of calm he'd shown earlier. This wasn't the charming CEO anymore. This was a man in full protector mode. "Stay behind me," he ordered firmly, voice low but unwavering. Shanae could barely breathe. The crash hadn't been thunder, it had been deliberate. And when she dared to glance past Mitchell's shoulder, her blood ran cold. Through the rain-streaked window, a figure loomed just beyond the courtyard lights, a familiar silhouette, disheveled and trembling with rage. The blonde woman. Her once perfect hair was soaked, makeup smeared across her pale face, her hands slamming against the glass as if possessed by fury. Shanae's pulse pounded in her ears. She'd seen hate before, but never like this. Mitchell's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching as he took a step forward, his entire body tense with restrained fury. "She's crossed the line," he muttered, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, dialing security, his tone cold and precise. "Now. I want her removed immediately. No questions, no delays." Even in that moment, his voice carried the authority of a man who commanded empires. Shanae stood frozen behind him, clutching the twins, their tiny bodies trembling against her. "Mummy, who is that lady?" Mia whispered, her voice quivering. Shanae swallowed hard, forcing a gentle tone she didn't feel. "It's okay, baby." "Everything's okay. Mr. Mitchell's here." Her words steadied her daughters, but inside she was shaking. This wasn't a confrontation she had chosen. It was one forced upon her by a stranger's jealousy and obsession. Mitchell turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for the briefest second, and in his eyes she saw something raw. Protective rage, yes, but also something deeper, something personal. Outside, the blonde woman pounded her fists against the glass again, screaming over the storm. "You think you can take him from me?" she shrieked, her voice cracked by desperation. "You'll regret this, you pathetic little gold digger." Shanae flinched, every cruel word slicing through her. But before she could even react, Mitchell's voice boomed through the room. "Enough!" He slammed his palm against the window from the inside, his expression dark, commanding. "Leave her alone!" His tone cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. The blonde froze, startled by his fury, her wild eyes widening at the man who'd once tolerated her antics, now looking at her like a stranger. "Mitchell, you don't understand," she screamed, but her voice broke halfway through, drowned by the sirens approaching from the gate. "Oh, I understand perfectly," he said through gritted teeth, never raising his voice yet, somehow sounding more powerful than a shout. "What I don't tolerate is you threatening a woman under my protection." Shanae blinked, her heart thudding at his words. "Under my protection." The phrase echoed inside her like a promise she didn't know she needed until now. Security guards rushed into the courtyard moments later, their flashlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The blonde woman stumbled backward, screaming, "You'll regret this, Mitchell." "She's not one of us," Her words were shrill and venomous, but Mitchell didn't flinch. "You're right," he said coldly through the window pane. "She's better." That single statement silenced her entirely, her face twisting with shock before two guards took her arms and led her away, her cries fading into the distance. Inside, silence lingered, broken only by the heavy rain. Shanae's legs felt weak beneath her, and she sank onto the couch, clutching the twins who were now half asleep from exhaustion and fear. Mitchell knelt beside her, his expression softening as he brushed a damp curl from her forehead. "It's over," he murmured gently. "She won't come near you again." But Shanae wasn't sure. There had been something in that woman's eyes, something unhinged, something that wouldn't just vanish with a single confrontation. "I don't understand why she hates me," Shanae whispered. "I didn't do anything." Mitchell hesitated, then exhaled deeply. "It's not about what you did. It's about what you are." His tone was low, almost reverent. "You have something she doesn't. Peace, dignity, and that's something people like her can't stand to see." Shanae looked up at him, startled by his words. The sincerity, the quiet admiration in his voice, it was almost too much to process. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured again, a reflex against the warmth spreading in her chest. He smiled faintly, leaning closer. "Then maybe I shouldn't think them either." But I can't help it. For a long moment, their eyes locked, neither daring to move. The air between them pulsed with something unspoken, something fragile and powerful all at once. The storm outside began to ease, its fury replaced by soft rainfall that whispered against the window. The twins had drifted off completely, their tiny breaths steady and calm, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. Mitchell stood, pulling off his jacket and draping it gently over their small forms. "You should rest," he said softly. "You've had enough for one night." Shanae shook her head, rubbing her arms. "I couldn't sleep after that," she admitted. "Not after seeing her like that." Mitchell's gaze hardened again. "She's dangerous, but she won't touch you." "I'll make sure of it." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The warmth of him, the quiet certainty in his presence, made her heart flutter in spite of her fear. "Why are you doing this, Mitchell?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "You barely know me." He turned toward her, his blue eyes steady. "Because I want to. Because I should have done something sooner. You don't deserve to face this alone." Shanae swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Gratitude warred with confusion, and something softer, something dangerous. She wanted to tell him to leave, to protect himself from the madness swirling around her, but instead she found herself whispering, "Thank you." The words felt small compared to what he'd done, but Mitchell simply nodded, his hand brushing hers for a fleeting second. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "Just promise me one thing. If anything like this happens again, if you even sense something off, you call me. No hesitation." She nodded slowly, her heart thudding faster. There was something in the way he said her name now, gentler, filled with a familiarity that hadn't been there before. "Mitchell!" she began. But before she could finish, there was a faint rustling sound at the front door. Both of them froze. The storm had gone eerily still, and for a moment the only sound was the faint dripping of water from Mitchell's coat. Shanae rose slowly, her pulse quickening again. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mitchell stood, every sense alert, his eyes narrowing toward the door. They waited, 1 second, 2, 3, and then something slid beneath the door. A thin envelope. Shanae's breath hitched as Mitchell stepped forward, picking it up carefully. The paper was damp, edges torn, and a faint smear of lipstick marked the back. He flipped it over, his jaw tightening as he read the single line scrawled in uneven ink. "This isn't over, Shanae. Watch your back." The words hung between them like a curse. Shanae pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, fear flashing across her face. Mitchell's expression turned to stone. "She won't stop," he muttered under his breath. "Not until she's forced to." He crumpled the note in his fist, his knuckles white. "I'm moving you and the girls tomorrow. Somewhere safe. Somewhere she'll never find you." Shanae stared at him, torn between protest and relief. "You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted firmly, meeting her eyes, "and I will." The storm outside had finally quieted, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. Shanae sank back onto the couch, holding her daughters close, the weight of the anonymous threat pressing on her chest. Mitchell stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by the faint city lights, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked streets below. He looked like a man ready for war, a war he hadn't planned on fighting, but one he refused to lose. As dawn began to break, a car engine purred quietly down the street. Neither Shanae nor Mitchell noticed the shadowy figure inside, watching their window with unblinking eyes. The blonde woman's smile flickered in the dark as she whispered to herself, "Let him protect you now, Shanae." Let's see how long that lasts. The night still hummed with echoes of tension, the sound of rain softly pattering against Shanae's window as dawn approached. She barely slept, her mind replaying the crash, the chaos, and the haunting note that had slipped under her door, whispering threats like poison. But when morning came, the scent of something warm, fresh pancakes, coffee, and a hint of vanilla, filled her tiny apartment. She blinked in surprise, stepping out of her room to see Mitchell in her small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes with an almost comical focus. The sight was surreal, a billionaire CEO in her worn-down kitchen, smiling as if this moment was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning, sunshine," he said softly, his deep voice tinged with warmth. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Shanae's lips curved into a hesitant smile. "Not much," she admitted, brushing her hair back as Max and Mia rushed in, squealing with delight at the sight of him. He greeted them with a grin, serving each a plate, his charm disarming the last of their fear from the previous night. Shanae stood by the counter, watching him. The way he moved, gentle yet sure, protective yet light-hearted, made her chest ache with emotions she couldn't name. It had been so long since someone had cared enough to make breakfast, to bring calm into her storm. Mitchell noticed her silence, and without a word, he handed her a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a shiver up her spine. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he murmured. "You deserve to rest too." Shanae looked away, her throat tightening. "Strength is all I've had," she whispered. "If I stop now, I'm afraid everything will fall apart." Mitchell's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his voice low. "Then let me hold it up with you. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Those words struck deep, unraveling something she'd built for years. Her walls, her defenses, her fear of needing someone. After breakfast, he helped the girls get ready for school, tying ribbons and packing their small bags as if he'd done it 100 times. Shanae watched in awe. There was something deeply human about him here. No suits, no boardrooms, no arrogance, just a man finding joy in simple moments. When the girls left, the apartment fell quiet. Shanae turned to him, her voice soft. "You didn't have to come." He smiled faintly, leaning against the counter. "I couldn't stay away. After last night, I needed to see you safe." The sincerity in his tone made her heart twist painfully. "Mitchell," she said quietly, "why do you care so much?" His reply was simple but heavy with emotion. "Because I see you, and I can't unsee you, Shanae." The silence between them thickened, filled with everything unspoken. Over the following days, Mitchell became a steady part of her world. He didn't smother or demand. Instead, he appeared when needed most, when the twins had trouble with homework, when the bills worried her, or when her laughter began to fade. He brought light into every shadow, sometimes with a joke, sometimes with a reassuring glance. Shanae found herself waiting for his calls, smiling at his texts, and feeling her heart flutter when his name lit up her phone. Her once quiet life began to bloom again, colored by his presence. They'd sit on her couch in the evenings, talking about their pasts. Mitchell shared stories of a lonely childhood, a life of power that had cost him peace, and betrayals that taught him not to trust easily. Shanae listened, her empathy wrapping around him like warmth in winter. In return, she told him about raising twins alone, the nights of doubt, and the silent prayers whispered over sleeping children. Each confession built a bridge between them, invisible yet unbreakable. Their laughter came easily now, often interrupted by the twins' giggles. One afternoon, Mitchell surprised them with a visit to a park. He pushed the girls on swings while Shanae watched, smiling shyly, realizing how natural it all felt. It scared her. How right it seemed. She wasn't supposed to fall for anyone, especially not him, but her heart didn't listen. When the girls ran off to play, Mitchell joined Shanae on the bench. "You're different," he said quietly. "You make chaos feel peaceful." She blushed, unsure how to respond. "And you," she teased softly, "make peace feel dangerous." They both laughed, but beneath the laughter was tension, a spark neither could ignore. That evening he walked her home. The air was crisp, the city lights shimmering like 1,000 small promises. As they reached her door, he hesitated. "Shanae," he said, his tone serious now, "I know the threats haven't stopped. But I'll protect you, no matter what it takes." She looked up at him, her pulse quickening. "You've done enough already." His eyes darkened slightly. "No, not until I know you and the girls are truly safe." Their gazes locked, and for a heartbeat, time stilled. Shanae felt her chest tighten, emotions colliding, fear, gratitude, and something deeper, something that scared her. Later that night, after putting Max and Mia to bed, Shanae sat by the window, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed. It was Mitchell. "Look outside." She frowned, stepping closer to the window, and there he was, across the street, looking up at her with a smile that melted every ounce of her doubt. She laughed softly, waving at him, through the glass. He gestured toward the sky. "See that?" he called out, pointing to the faint glow of the stars. "Even the universe has your back tonight." Her heart swelled, warmth spreading through her chest. But as she watched him leave, a flicker of unease returned. She couldn't shake the memory of the note, the warning scribbled in sharp ink. The next day, Mitchell invited them to a quiet dinner, away from the city noise. The restaurant overlooked the river, its soft lights reflecting off the water. Shanae wore a simple dress, her beauty effortless, her smile shy. When Mitchell saw her, he was momentarily speechless. "You look perfect," he whispered. She blushed, murmuring, "You always say the right things." Dinner flowed easily. Laughter, stories, gentle teasing, but beneath the calm, both of them felt an undercurrent of longing. When the girls fell asleep in the booth beside them, Mitchell reached across the table, taking Shanae's hand. "I can't imagine my life without you and them," he said, his voice low, his eyes filled with emotion. Shanae's breath hitched. She wanted to respond, to tell him how much he'd come to mean to her, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed. The message appeared on the screen, freezing her blood. "I know where you are. Don't think you're safe." Her fingers trembled, her color draining. Mitchell immediately noticed the shift in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern threading through his tone. Shanae showed him the message silently, her heart hammering. His jaw clenched, the calm in his eyes replaced by fury. "She's crossing the line," he muttered. already reaching for his phone to call security. Shanae stopped him with a trembling hand. What if it makes things worse? He looked at her, torn between rage and restraint. I won't let her hurt you, he said firmly. The drive home was tense, silence heavy between them. Shanae held her daughters close, her mind spinning with fear and questions. As they reached her apartment, Mitchell stepped out first, scanning the area. Everything seemed calm, but Shanae couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Once inside, he made sure every lock was secured before turning to her. You're not staying here alone, he said quietly. You and the girls will stay somewhere safe. I'll make arrangements, Shanae wanted to argue, but his eyes, dark with worry, silenced her. Mitchell, you don't have to. I do, he interrupted gently, because I care about you more than I've cared about anything in years. The confession hung between them, fragile and real. Shanae's breath caught, her heart pounding with emotion and fear. She looked at him, wanting to believe that love could protect them from everything lurking in the dark. But outside, unseen from their window, a car idled quietly. Headlights dimmed, and a shadowed figure inside watched the apartment with cold, calculated patience. The blonde woman's silhouette was barely visible, but her smirk was unmistakable. She whispered to herself, "Let's see how much your billionaire can protect you now, Shanae." The chapter ends with Shanae closing the curtains tightly, clutching her daughters, her heart torn between love's warmth and the shadow of danger creeping closer, leaving viewers anxious and desperate to know what happens next. 9. The night stretched long after the tension of the message, and sleep became an impossible luxury. Shanae sat by the window, the faint hum of the city echoing through the darkness, while the twins slept peacefully beside her. Fear still lingered at the edge of her heart, but somewhere in the quiet, the warmth of Mitchell's presence began to chase away the shadows. When he returned just before dawn, rain dripping from his coat, Shanae looked up at him, her protector, her unexpected constant. And for the first time, she saw more than the billionaire everyone else whispered about. She saw the man who had stood by her through fear, chaos, and uncertainty, the man who looked at her not with pity, but with respect and something deeper, love. Without speaking, he brushed the damp hair from her face and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a promise more powerful than words. It said, "I'm here. You're safe. Always." Shanae closed her eyes, letting herself lean into the comfort she had spent years denying. When morning came, the first golden rays spilled into the small apartment, casting warmth over everything that had once felt cold. Mitchell brewed coffee while humming softly, the sound wrapping around her heart like sunlight after a storm. The twins ran to him, their laughter filling the air, calling him Uncle Mitch as they climbed into his arms. He laughed too, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. For Shanae, that moment, the simple joy of her daughter's laughter mingling with his, felt like a glimpse of the life she'd always dreamed of, but never thought she could have. Yet beneath the joy, a quiet determination stirred in Mitchell's eyes. He knew the threats hadn't ended, and he wasn't about to let darkness touch the woman and children who had become his world. Over the following days, Mitchell's influence came quietly but powerfully. Security around Shanae's building was tightened, her workplace was discreetly upgraded, and her financial burdens began to fade without her even realizing how. But more than wealth, he gave her something money couldn't buy: peace. He taught her that she didn't need to fight every battle alone. "You've carried enough storms," he told her one evening, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Let me be the calm you come home to." Shanae's eyes welled with emotion. "You already are," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. That night they shared stories again, of dreams deferred, of pain endured, and of the quiet hope that love could still heal what life had broken. Their connection deepened not through grand gestures but through presence. His steady eyes, her gentle understanding, the way they could simply sit in silence and still feel everything. But the world outside wasn't done testing them. The blonde woman's bitterness had curdled into obsession. Each attempt to ruin Shanae, anonymous calls, false rumors, and shadowed appearances, only seemed to fail spectacularly. Mitchell had eyes everywhere, his patience transforming into quiet ruthlessness when it came to protecting what he loved. Shanae, however, refused to hide. "If I let her scare me," she told him one afternoon, "then she wins. And I won't give her that power." Her strength mesmerized him. "You amaze me," he murmured, cupping her face, "every day." And when he kissed her this time, it wasn't just passion, it was reverence, a vow unspoken but eternal. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, under a sky bruised by storm clouds. Shanae had just left her workplace when the blonde woman appeared across the street, her expression a twisted mix of rage and desperation. "You think you've won?" she hissed, stepping closer. Shanae's pulse quickened, but she didn't back away. "This isn't a competition," Shanae said calmly, her voice steady. "You can't destroy what you never built." Mitchell's car pulled up just then, and he stepped out, eyes dark with fury. "This ends here," he said coldly. The blonde woman's smirk faltered. "You'd throw away everything for her?" she spat. His reply was sharp, final and true. "I'd throw away everything without her." Security moved in moments later, escorting the trembling woman away as thunder cracked above them, the storm breaking just as the tension did. Shanae stood still, her heart pounding, watching as Mitchell turned to her, rain slicking his hair, and whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." When he pulled her into his arms, the storm faded to nothing but background noise. For the first time in years, Shanae felt the weight lift from her chest. The war was over. The shadows had lost. And in that embrace, she realized that love, true, patient, unconditional love, had conquered what hate never could. The days that followed were filled with quiet transformations. Mitchell insisted she and the twins move somewhere safer, and though hesitant, Shanae finally agreed. His home was everything she wasn't used to, luxurious, vast, filled with space and light, but he made sure it felt like theirs. He didn't control, he collaborated. He asked her opinions on everything, from furniture to routines, treating her not as someone he rescued, but as someone who belonged by his side. Max and Mia adapted instantly. They brought laughter into every corner, decorating the mansion with crayons, giggles, and innocence. Slowly, affection grew between them and Mitchell, not forced but natural, pure. They started calling him Uncle Mitch less often, and one afternoon, as they played in the garden, Mia looked up and called out softly, "Daddy, look!" Mitchell froze. The word hit him harder than he expected, filling a space in his heart he never knew was empty. He knelt, tears pricking his eyes as he pulled the twins close. "Daddy's right here," he whispered. Shanae watched from the porch, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, her heart bursting with love. From that moment, the bond between them all grew stronger than ever. Mitchell adored the twins, attending school events, helping with bedtime stories, even learning to braid Mia's hair, with hilarious results that made them all laugh until their sides hurt. And through it all, his love for Shanae only deepened. He admired her resilience, her grace, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite everything she had endured. One evening, as the sun set behind their garden, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, Mitchell took her hand and led her outside. The girls were asleep, the air was still, and for the first time in a long time, peace truly surrounded them. "I used to think love was complicated," Mitchell confessed, his voice low and rough with emotion, "that it came with rules, conditions, power. But then you came along, And you showed me it's the simplest thing in the world. It's choosing the same person every day, no matter what. Shanae's eyes shimmered with tears. You gave me back my hope, she whispered. And my home. He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb across her cheek. No, he murmured. You gave me mine. Their lips met under the soft glow of the fading sun, a kiss filled with promise and permanence, sealing not just their love, but their healing. Life moved forward with quiet beauty. Shanae's small dreams blossomed. She started a community program to help single mothers, supported by Mitchell, but run entirely by her. Her confidence shone, inspiring others, just as she had once inspired him. People who once mocked her now admired her, seeing the woman who had risen above humiliation to build something extraordinary. Mitchell often watched her from afar during events, his eyes filled with pride, whispering to himself, "That's my queen." And every time she caught his gaze, Shanae's heart fluttered, just like it had that first night he'd stood up for her in the restaurant. As months passed, the scars of the past faded, replaced by laughter, love, and endless small moments that stitched their family together. Movie nights, lazy mornings, and spontaneous dances in the kitchen. They found joy in ordinary things, their love unshaken by the world outside. On one special evening, they stood together on the balcony, watching the sunset melt into twilight. Shanae leaned into his arms, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked. Mitchell smiled, tightening his hold around her. "Every day," he said, "and every day I thank fate for that night. For you." She looked up at him, her brown eyes glowing in the fading light. "We were strangers once," she said. "Now look at us." He kissed her gently, replying, "Now we're forever." The twins' laughter echoed from inside, filling the air with joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Shanae felt peace settle into her bones, the kind that comes only when love has finally conquered fear. The story closed with them standing together, Mitchell, Shanae, Max, and Mia, a family born not from perfection, but from resilience, faith, and the courage to love again. The city lights glimmered around them, reflections of everything they'd endured and everything they'd built together. Shanae smiled, whispering to herself, "Even the humblest heart can capture," and as Mitchell wrapped his arms around her, the stars began to appear above them, bright, unshaken, eternal, mirroring the love that had conquered all. Thank you so much for listening to Beyond Color Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment telling me what moment moved you the most, and share it with someone who believes in the power of love and redemption. Remember, every heart deserves a second chance, and sometimes love finds us when we least expect it. Stay blessed, stay kind, and I'll meet you again in the next story, only on Beyond Color Stories.